Angolan Revolution, the Angola reached independence in 1975. And at that time, there were three organizations. One was called the MPLA, the Movement for the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola, the FNLA, and I'm going to get these names straight in a minute, and UNITA. And all three were, FNLA was operated pretty much in the north, UNITA operated pretty much in the south, and the MPLA operated throughout the whole country. And at independence in November of 1975, South Africa invaded. Now at this time, most people wasn't sure which organization, which group that they supported. But in 1975, when the MPLA, which was the government, when Portugal, Angola was a Portuguese colony, when Portugal pulled out, MPLA formed a government. At that time also, South Africa invaded from the south. Zaire invaded from the north. Zaire invaded from the north along with FNLA troops. South Africa invaded from the south along with UNITA troops. So this made it clear for most people, you know, which was the true liberation movement. And the CIA poured a lot of funds into it, into Angola.
The CIA went into Angola in July of 1975. We started out with $6 million, and eventually the total budget was $31 million. The first effort was arms that were sent from America to Kinshasa in U.S. Air Force C-141 planes. And then from Kinshasa, we hauled the arms into Angola in smaller airplanes. The total was about 1,500 tons of arms, 30,000 rifles and small rockets and mortars. Our funds and arms were going to two of the three Angola factions. One of them headed up by Holden Roberto, who had had a relationship with us for about 15 years, and to Savimbi, who had not been well known by the CIA. He had the sole virtue of being in opposition to the MPLA, whom we were determined to oppose. President Mobutu of Zaire wanted this program. We bribed him. We gave him $2,750,000. CIA officers went in as advisors and trainers. They were called intelligence gatherers. But in fact, they were preparing our allies for combat.
I fled to San Salvador on January 16th. What did the enemy do in San Salvador? You mean what I saw? The Americans were there. How do you know they were Americans?
When
the villagers saw them with their own eyes, they saw they were Americans. There were 20 Americans. These Americans, what did they look like? Were they white? Were they black? Describe them.
They
were your color, comrade. They were not black. They had chestnut eyes. You know, whites.
There were not enough CIA advisors to make a great deal of difference, however, and we hired European mercenaries, and we tried to hire white Angolan refugees to go back in as mercenaries fighting on our side. The CIA collaborated with the South Africans, and it was not officially ordered by the National Security Council, but there was liaison at all levels. The CIA was nervous about the role the Senate might play in this war. Senator Clark, on the Foreign Relations Committee, made a trip to Africa to review the situation, a fact-finding trip to report to the Senate. The CIA watched him with some apprehension to see that he didn't get information we didn't want him to have. The Senate, led by Senator Clark, shut down the Angola program in December of '75. While the Senate was shutting us down, a Cuban army eventually of 10 to 15,000 combat soldiers, MiG-21 aircraft, tanks, just swept over the FNLA and UNITA. And we lost decisively.
A victory that will change the course of African history. The victory of the heroic people of Angola.
Now, Cuba had a long history of support for African liberation. And I don't want to go into that, it might take a little too much time, but they supported in the Congo with Lumumba, they worked with different groups in just all over Africa in terms of African liberation.
Che Guevara was there working with some African liberation
Exactly.
movements. In fact, a lot of Cubans are black, that a lot of the Cubans originally were slaves who came over from Africa to work on the Spanish sugar cane plantations.
Yeah.
So they have roots there.
And they still maintain the culture of the so-called mother country.
Right. And the interesting thing is that, I was reading one thing and it's really true. They said one of the most interesting paradoxes of history is that if the slave traders knew that the people that they were taking over, to Cuba, to cut sugar cane as slaves, were going to come back centuries later and help liberate that territory, they wouldn't know what to do. And it's true, But anyhow, so the situation is that the MPLA government is backed up into the capital of Luanda. There's two major armies, one coming from the south. South Africa put one of the biggest tank brigades together since World War II, to attack. And also from the north. Now, South Africa has still the most modern army on the shores of Africa. So of course, they felt like this was going to be a cakewalk, They felt like that it was going to be just a few weeks, that they were going to take Luanda, then they were going to back up and set up a united government. The MPLA government asked for help, sent out a call for help, and actually a lot of countries came to help. The major country was Cuba. They discussed it, and they decided that if South Africa took Angola, that all of Africa would have to deal with apartheid, and it would destabilize more and more borders. So the African countries also supported Cuba coming. That's just an important point to make. So Cuba sent over about 40,000 troops or so to stop the South African invasion. The South Africans at this time were right outside of Luanda, before the Cubans could come, and they had done a tremendous amount of damage, to the Angolan countryside. Moving all the way up. Cubans stopped them, and the Angolans stopped them. Another important point is that the MPLA army was a guerrilla army, which is totally, I don't know if your viewers are into tactics of war, but you don't hold land when you're try to hold land when you're a guerrilla army.
It's a different technique,
totally
different strategy.
So they really didn't even know how to fight the South African, the Zaire,
right,
and UNITA and FNLA. Okay, so the Cuban army comes in, stops the attack, and pushes South Africa all the way back to the borders of Namibia.
Which is pretty amazing, a small country like Cuba taking a giant like South Africa, which was supported by the CIA and the United States, and pushing him back.
Yeah, and pushed the Zaire troops back up to the north. And then the South Africans immediately wanted to negotiate. And they wanted to negotiate because they knew that the force that had been put together could have went right into Namibia and liberated Namibia then. But they stopped at the Namibian border and negotiated. South Africa said that they would stay, there should be a demilitarized zone on both sides of the Angolan border, in Namibia and in Angola, and that they would pull back. Of course, what happened was they didn't. They continually invaded. They continually invaded and kept invading up till, last year. So that's the historical situation, and I can, if you want, talk about some of the current...
well, that's what we're interested in. What's been going on in the last year or two to try to normalize?
Yeah, the South Africans are saying they want to negotiate again. I wouldn't trust them.
Right, right. Right on both points. The South Africans want to negotiate again, and of course people wonder, why is that? I mean, why all of a sudden the South Africans want peace in Angola and also are ready to sign the UN Resolution 435 giving independence to Namibia, which will sure put in a SWAPO government, Southwest
which
Africa
is a leftist government.
Yeah, and it's the government that they have been trying to stop since they have been in Namibia. Well, the point is this: in November of first of all, South Africa has continually invaded, and there have been how the defense of Angola has been since '75. Is they have built up 3 lines of defense. The FNLA, I mean the FAPLA troops, which is the Angolan army. 3 lines of defense, and then behind them the Cubans are. The Cubans sit back and have not really been in battle since '75, '76.
Oh, really?
Yes, the FAPLA troops, are so good now that they have been able to stop South Africa The South African troops have never been able to get to the third line of defense. The second line has always stopped the South African troops. But South Africa decided that the balance of forces were such that they wanted, because they were afraid that SWAPO was going to get independence from Namibia, and a lot of things were happening around Africa. And they were even destabilizing more countries more.
Oh, Mozambique, they've been tearing Mozambique to death.
Exactly.
With their own countries.
Right. Right, and they've been Lesotho's, you know, Swaziland, Botswana. They've been going to all these countries, you know, at will. So they decided, see, South Africa understands that the most important country in Southern Africa right now is Angola. And they wanted to destabilize Angola more than any other country. So what they decided was, they put their hopes on attacking a small town, which was the center of the MPLA military. It was called Cuito, Cuanavale, and they were going to move the Angolans out of Cuito, Cuanavale, put UNITA in, and
which is headed by Savimbi, the guy who's been to the United States a lot and supported by the CIA.
And South African connections.
Okay.
CIA has been supporting Savimbi, you know, since before '75.
Right.
Even though he says he's a Marxist,
right,
which is curious. But anyway, go ahead.
Savimbi says whoever he's talking to,
right,
he says that's what he is.
Right.
He's a Christian. He's a Marxist. He's this.
Right.
You know,
he's an opportunist.
Yeah.
Big opportunist. Okay.
Right.
As a matter of fact, that you know, one of the things that's really clear is the CIA and the United States government supports UNITA with a lot of funds. And by supporting UNITA, they're supporting South Africa.
We can decide without asking South Africans. We can decide without asking the Americans.
A lot of the weapons that go to UNITA end up in South African hands. Anyhow, they wanted to take up this town called Cuito, Cuanavale, and make it a UNITA stronghold, and then UNITA was going to declare a government, you know, and then ask for South African help if they were attacked. So that was the plan. So it sounded like a very good plan. So the South Africans moved in across the river. Cuito, Cuanavale is on a river, and started bombarding and sieging Cuito, Cuanavale. And this happened in November. The siege went from November to March. November of '87 to March of '88. There was a siege. They attacked the city at least once a month, with major attacks coming in January, February, and March to try to break and push the MPLA out of Cuito, Cuanavale. The Angolans again asked the Cubans for assistance, because they realized that this was the most serious attempt at breaking their sovereignty that has happened since '75. So they asked the Cubans for help. The Cubans talked about it and discussed it and decided that it was so important that they not take this town, that there were about 40,000 Cuban troops already in Angola, so that they not only wanted to move those Cuban troops into battle, but they sent 12,000 of their best troops that were in Cuba to Angola.
This was a very complex undertaking, particularly from the logistics point of view. For this operation, the Cuban Army will only take volunteers. Each person is interviewed to see if they have any personal objections to being a volunteer, or if they have any home problems or psychological problems which would prevent them from volunteering.
Es decir, a nivel de las Fuerzas Armadas, una maniobra en saludo al 31º aniversario del desembarco de Veracruz. En caso de que se nos plantee una misión por el mando superior de cumplir alguna misión internacionalista.
The term internationalista is a very special one in Cuba. People who volunteer for overseas duty of any type, whether military or health workers or education, are called internationalistas.